Today's daf we're going to be learning is Horayot, daf bet. Welcome to Masechet Horayot. Very exciting for all those who finished Masechet Avodah Zarah, Mazal Tov, and if you haven't listened to the siyum is already up on the site. There might be some issues with the site. Bear with us for a few days. New website, new issues. Hopefully within the next week or so, a lot of the issues will be ironed out. It might take a little longer to finish everything, but we'd love to get feedback. You might want to wait a day or two to give us some feedback unless it's a clear, you can send us feedback either which way. Anyway, welcome to Masechet Horayot. If you're new to learning, we have a nice short 13-day Masechet. If you're having any issues in the next few days, I just want to remind everybody you can always find on any podcast app or on YouTube the shiurim. So you can get around the website if the website's temporarily down or something like that. This week's learning is sponsored by Helen Danzak. My dear Uncle Phil passed away on August 27th with family at hand. He was the kind of uncle that the kids of all ages gravitated to. I'm not alone in saying he was my favorite uncle. He is missed. May his neshama have an aliyah. Today's daf is sponsored by Audrey Levant in honor of Deborah Dixon. Happy birthday to Hadron's newest wonderful addition to the team. I'm excited to start another school year of learning with you, my friend. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. And special mazel tov to Terry. I'm finishing Shas yesterday with us. It's very, very special. Okay, we're going to start our Masechet. It's a bit of a long daf. I don't want to spend too much time in introduction. I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you haven't yet listened to Ayelet Hoffman-Lipson's introduction and Shirin Chamutal's introduction. They both give perspective on the Masechet and Daf Mishalahen. And just to give a little bit of background, we're basically starting with this idea. Okay, the main concept that goes throughout this is Horayot. What is Horayot? It's a teaching of the court. Okay, why is this here? I mentioned this at the siyum, right? We finished Sanhedrin. We had some other things to finish up at the end of Sanhedrin. We got into Makot and then Shvuot. Then we came back to Avodah Zarah because that was really mentioned in Shvuot. And now we're moving into another Beit Din related issue and ending our Seder with this. Okay, right now we're not going to. There's also Masechet Avot and Iduyot in different orders of how the Masechta work. There's only Mishna. They're not in the Daf Yomi cycle, but important that you know that they exist. Everyone knows Pirkei Avot, right? It's here. It's in Nezikin. Okay. Another discussion. Why and what? Okay, not for today. But the real issue at the crux of everything, which is not where we're going to start, is what we call the Par Ha'elem Davar shel tzibur. What is this? Now, this is in a section in Sefer Vayikra where it talks about 4 different sin offerings. Okay, there happens to be another section, but Midbar, we're going to get to all this. Unfortunately, in Daf Yomi, we don't have enough time for proper overall introductions. Okay, that's why we have extra content on those sites, so you can listen to other introductions. But the basics I'm going to give you right now, and as we go on, we're going to learn the different pieces, is that there's 4 korbanot mentioned there. The first one, is the Kohen HaMashiach. That means the Kohen who makes a mistake, a leader who makes a mistake. Par Halem Davar Shel Tzibur is the Sanhedrin mistakenly teaches an incorrect ruling. And the people, the majority, that's why it's called tzibur, the majority of the people follow the ruling. There's a special korban you bring for that. Each of these is its own unique special korban. Nasi, okay, we'll get into later what all the korbanot are. The Nasi is the king. If the king makes a mistake, okay, this is all about, and it's the obvious topic to talk about right now, which is, leaders making mistakes and admitting their mistakes and publicly offering a sacrifice to atone for it. Very important issue. Having our leaders take responsibility for mistakes. And then a yachid, an individual. What if an individual sins? This is the classic korban chatat. It's mentioned in the context of these 4. Okay, that's what we're talking about. What is a classic korban chatat? We have to understand what that is before we move on, which is a chatat is brought on a sin that if you did it intentionally, okay, all of these are shkaga. All of these are mistakes, okay, which I thought was interesting. This is really a continuation of Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin was all about the court and all about the glory of the court, the importance of the court. You have to listen to the court. And then all of a sudden, it ends with, right, the whole Seder Nezikin ends with, courts can make mistakes, okay? Besides leaders, which is another interesting topic in and of itself. But the real topic is the courts can make mistakes. And what do we do when the court makes a mistake? And what if we follow the court? Do you follow the court blindly? Do you not, right? We talked about this a little bit in Zakei Mamrei, when we have this judge that goes against the court. And we're going to actually make mention of him today. But very minor, but he's going to come up in today's daf. It's a fascinating topic about that immediately starts out assuming the court can make mistakes. Okay? Now, the classic case, as I said, is the majority of the people follow. And there's a special unique korban that's brought to atone. We'll get into the whole thing. Who brings it, whose money, okay, that's a side point. Now we're going to start. Our Masechet starts out in a bit of a strange place. Why does it start out in a strange place? Because you would have expected it to start with paralel davar shel tzibur in the main case. The Mishnah is going to start with an exception to the rule. You might remember Makot started out that way. Ketzad ein ha'idim na'asim zomimim, right? How do we not have zomimim? This also starts out like that. Horu Beit Din, we're now going to start. Horu Beit Din la'avor halakha mikol mitzvot hamurot b'Torah. The Beit Din taught a mistaken ruling, okay, to go against one of the mitzvot it says in the Torah. Now, it's not just any mitzvah, okay? It's not. It has to be what I said before. It has to be something that if they had done it intentionally, it would be karet. And now and if they did it on their own, by themselves, by mistake, they would bring a korban chatat. That's the case where we're going to have parhalim davar shel tzibur. Okay? It's where they issue, and the classic case they're going to always talk about is chelev. Okay? Even though it's a bit of an esoteric topic, but chelev is a type of fat of the animal that usually gets, if it's in a sacrifice, it gets burned on the altar, and it's forbidden for us to eat from animals, from domesticated animals, because those are the ones that are offered as sacrifices. There's different fats in the animal. There's shumanim, which are regular fats that you can eat. And then there's chelev, which is forbidden, and it's isur karet. So let's say they rule and say that this is not chelev, and it was chelev, and you eat it. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. So they taught to go against one of these mitzvot that falls into these categories. And an individual goes, not the tzibur, okay, that's what we're talking about, a total exception to the rule. An individual goes and makes a mistake based on their ruling. Now, we're going to get into the Gemara. The Gemara is going to say, why do you have to say makes a mistake on their ruling? You could just say, does like their ruling. That obviously is a mistake because they taught it this way. The yachid went the other way. By mistake, by their actions. You don't need the word shogeg. What's the word shogeg? We're going to have a whole sugya on it and two totally opposite approaches of what Rava said. Okay. But we'll get back to that. Bein she'asu, we could just understand it simply, the yachid followed the court and did something wrong. Bein she'asu v'asai mahem, whether they did it and the individual did it with them. Bein she'asu v'asachreihem, or they did it, in other words, they ate the chelev, and then later, he eats the chelev. Bein shelo asu v'asa, whether they didn't do it at all, the court, the judges, they didn't eat it. They said it was permitted, but they didn't eat it themselves. For whatever reason, maybe they just weren't hungry. V'asa, and the person goes and eats it on their own. Patul, no matter what, this person is exempt. Now here's a huge, huge, huge line. Mipnei she'tala b'Beit Din. Why is this person exempt? Well, they relied on the court, and that was the right thing to do. We're supposed to rely on the court. So because they rely on the court, it's not their fault. This is, right, what's fascinating about this machloket, this masechet, it's all about responsibility. Okay? Very big topic these days. In general, it's a big topic, responsibility. So, and in fact, it reminds me of Bava Kama, Adamu ad olam, you're always responsible for your actions. All of a sudden, not exactly. You're not responsible if the court told you to do it and you did it. Okay. Now this sounds very straight, clear, and obvious, right? It makes a lot of sense. But there's something missing here. What's the problem? Well, how do you get atonement for it? We have this sense, and we've learned this through many, right? If you go to Rotzeach Bishgaga, right? You kill someone accidentally, or in general, shogeg. All these korbanot, mi'ilah. I could go on and on and on about cases of mistakes that you need to bring a korban to atone for you. Even if you're not sure you did a mistake. We learned about an Asham Taloi. You have to get atonement in the meantime, right? So you now have a case where there's no parhalim davar shel tzibur because the tzibur didn't do it. So there's no communal responsibility here. And the individual doesn't bring it. There's no sacrifice at all. So even though it seems kind of obvious when you read it, it's actually really not obvious because what happened to the atonement? And we're going to end our daf with the rabbi's opinion. We're going to hear somebody who says, by the way, just know that there's a machloket about this. The Mishna gave one opinion. But the rabbis think that the individual does have to bring a sin offering for obvious reasons. Maybe it's not their fault, but they still need atonement, so they do bring a korban. And that's where we're going to end today's daf. I want to mention it already now because sometimes you learn something and it gets so ingrained in you. Obviously they're exempt, but not everybody thinks that way. Okay, now we're going to move to the second case. Horu Beit Din, v'yada echad mehem sheta'u. Now we're talking about a different person, not the individual, but one of the judges. After the judges taught this ruling, one of the judges knew that they made a mistake. O talmid v'hu ra'oi lahora, or wasn't a judge, It was a student who is in a position where they can teach, they can issue halakhic rulings. Horayot doesn't mean teach, it means issue halakhic rulings. Okay, they're in a higher position in society, they can do this. V'halach v'asal pihem. Okay, so now you have an interesting situation. You're in a position of, right, you're a high caliber person, you know the rules, you're not just an individual who maybe knows, maybe thinks they know better than the court, but you know you are the court, or you're at the level of the court, and you know they're making a mistake. And you go and you eat that chaylev anyway. Okay, now what? Ben shasu v'asai mehem, we're going to have the same trio there, whether they ate it and he ate with them. Ben shasu v'asa achareihem, they ate and he ate later. Ben shelo asu v'asa, or they didn't eat it at all, but he did. Harei ze chayav. He is obligated. Why is he obligated? Mipnei shelo tala bebeit din. He has his own mind, his own ability to make decisions. You can't say he relied on the court. He knew the court was wrong, and he did it anyway. Now later, Abai is going to say, well, then he's mazid. That's intentional sin. How could you possibly call this shogeg? We're going to get back to that. Because remember, this is very important to understand. Maybe you don't remember. A korban is only brought in these cases for shgaga, for an unwitting action. You don't get to atone. Okay, a korban is like a gift. The fact that we can bring a korban and atone for a sin is a gift. We can't do that if we sinned intentionally. Okay, most of these korbanot are for unintentional sins. Now they're going to say Zeh HaKlal, and this is a totally unnecessary line. The Gemara later is going to darshan. What is each part of this sentence coming to teach us something new? Because we already learned this. HaToleh b'atzmo chayav, HaToleh b'Beit Din patur. Okay, if you rely on your own, you're responsible. In other words, what's this individual sin offering that it talks about in the Torah? That's someone who does a sin offering on their own. HaToleh b'Beit Din patur. Okay, but if you rely on the court, you're exempt. Okay, that's the ruling, again, the Mishna. Like we said, the rabbis disagree. This we'll see as Rabbi Yehuda's position. I just want to get you clear with some terminology that we're going to actually come back to at the end of the daf. Because here it calls it toleh b'atzmo and toleh b'beit din. Later we're going to have what's called a shigigat ma'aseh. That means when you do an action mistakenly, meaning on your own, versus a horu beit din, okay, a teaching of the court. So there's teachings of the court that cause people to sin, and there's people's own actions that cause people to sin. It's a very simple distinction, but I wanted you to know the terminology that when we get back to it. So today's daf is going to have a lot of different sections. We're going to move from section to section, each one kind of relating to something else in the Mishnah. So the first thing is, what language, now what's interesting is, I told you that the Mishnah starts off with the exception to the rule. But the Gemara starts off with the rule. The Gemara wants to go back to the classic par halem davar shel tzibur. They want to get you grounded here. What does it take for something to be get to the category of par halem davar shel tzibur, that you would have to bring that kind of korban? What is a hora'ah? What is a teaching of the court, and what language do they have to use to make it a teaching of the court? You'll see in a minute what I mean. Amar Shmuel, la'olam ein beit din chayavim ad she'amru lahem mutarim atem. Shmuel says you're not going to be obligated. That's why we know we're talking about the par halem davar shel tzibur. You're not going to be obligated to communal, unwitting sin offering that based on erroneous ruling of the court until the people said, can we eat this? And the court responded, you can eat this. As opposed to what? As opposed to, if the court just ruled they were learning Torah and they said, this seems to be permitted, and then the people went and did that. That's not a hora'ah. There's a difference between when you learn and when you give a ruling. That's a big difference. You could say something, we've seen this, but there's a great line I always like, Rabbi Yochanan says, right, they start asking him some question, why are you doing that? You say otherwise. He says, just because I say that doesn't mean I'm going to act upon it, right? This is why I learned the sugya, but there's a difference, right? Lots of people always like to ask me, well, what's the practical, right? We're learning Gemara here. We're not issuing halakhic rulings here. It's a whole different thing. So Shmuel says, the Beit Din, it has to be that the people ask, can we do it? And they said, you can do it. Okay, or you can. Let's say it this way. I want to translate it properly because in a minute we're going to see a different language. You are permitted. Period. Okay. Now, Rav Dimi min harde amal ad she'amru lahem mutarim atem la'asot. It's not enough to say you are permitted. You are permitted to do this. You are permitted to eat. You are permitted to whatever it might be that they're permitting. You are permitted to do this. It's not enough to just say you are permitted. That's not even enough. Forget about I think it's permitted, or, this is the way I understand the sugya. It's not enough to say you're permitted to do it. you're permitted. You have to say, you're permitted to do it. So now we're going to bring 3 sources to prove Rav Dimi Minahardea is right. My time, but what's his reason? Well, first we're going to say why, and then we're going to bring 3 sources. Because a ruling is not complete unless there's a call to action. I always talk about this with Maggie, right? She says if we're going to advertise something, there has to be a call to action. You have to say, do this, right? Join, sign up, register, right? So if you just say you're allowed to, you can sign up, right? Sign up now. There's a difference. I'm Rabbi. Here come the 3 sources. Abai brings 1. Afananami Tanina. This appears in the Mishnah. Here we go back to Zakeh Mamre. What's a Zakeh Mamre? It's a rebellious elder. It's a person who says, I'm a judge. I disagree with what the court said. I bring it to court. The court rules against him. Majority rules. Then he goes to the higher court, right? Keeps bringing it up till he gets to the big Sanhedrin. They rule against him. Then it says, he gets killed if he, now we're going to see, if he what? Chazar li'iro, if he goes back to his city after he finishes and he gets to the high court and they say you're wrong. And he still believes he's right. If he goes back to his city, shana v'limei kederach shalimei, and he continues teaching the sugya the way he taught the sugya before, patur. He's actually not obligated. If he wants to continue in his yeshiva teaching things the way he taught them before, no problem. Horeh la'asot chayav. But if he issues a ruling that they can act upon his approach, which the court overruled, then he's going to be obligated. So what do you see here? Horeh la'asot. The word la'asot, to do, comes together with the hora'ah. There's proof. Second source, Amar Rabbi Abba, Af Ananami Tanina. This is famous sugya, you'll remember. These are all famous sugyas. Yevamo. We have a woman whose husband dies, or we think he died. There's only one witness to prove he's dead. Now, we allow a court to allow a woman to remarry based on that. So what happened in this case? Horu la Beit Din. Again, hora'ah. What did they tell her? Lehina say. Here's the action, call to action. They said, they ruled, and this is already the proof. We're going to read the rest of this, but this is already the proof. They told her, you are allowed to get married. Call to action. Now, in this case, she didn't get married, but she went and slept with somebody else. Then her husband turns up. It turns out the one witness wasn't telling the truth. What happens? She didn't follow the court here. They said, go get married. She ended up in prostitution or in some, relationship like it was forbidden. So she has to bring a korban because that's not what they permitted her. Okay, that doesn't have to do with our topic. The main point is here's our hora'ah. And it says, la'asot, to do, call to action. Amar Ravina, af ananami tanina. Ravina says, I also have a source. And what's his source? Our Mishnah. Horu Beit Din la'avor alachat mikol mitzvot amor b'torah. The Beit Din taught to transgress. There you have it, the call to action. If they taught go against one of the mitzvot, then you're going to have, right now, in our case, happened to be an exception to the rule, but it would have fit in if the majority had followed it. There's your proof. V'tulo midi. And I have nothing more to say. In other words, we've clearly proven Rav Dimi Minahardea. But there is more to say, because now we're going to see the entire sugya in mirror image. Okay, we're going to have a different version. Today we're going to have a few different versions of things. Ikad Amr, some people say that the opinions were flipped. Amr Shmuel, Ein Beit Din chayavim ad she'amru lem mutarim atem la'asot. Shmuel is the one who says you need the call to action. We're going to go through this very quickly now because it's just the same thing, kind of doing it in a different direction. Rav Dimi Minahardea Amar afilu mutarim atem nigmara hora'ah. He says, no, even if you say you're permitted, it's as if you did a call to action. That's enough to say. If I tell you there's a siyum to sign up for, it's obvious that I'm telling you sign up for it, right? I don't need to say, go sign up. So he says that's enough. So in this case, Rav Dimi says it's enough. Now what's going to happen here in the mirror image of the sugya, they're going to bring the same 3 opinions to question Rav Dimi. Okay, so while you might have thought they would bring them to support the first opinion, but no, they actually bring them to, in each version, the sources were brought to respond to Rav Dimi. In the first one, it was to prove he was right. In the second one, it was to disprove him. So we're going to do the exact same thing. Amar Abaye, halot nan hachi, but that's not what it says in the Mishnah. Chazar li'irov v'shana u'limei kederach shelimei patur. Horeh la'asot chayav, and notice it says you have to teach to do. There you have it, you're wrong. Amar Rabbi Abba, halot nan hachi. It doesn't say that in the Mishnah. Because look at the Mishnah. Horu la Beit Din linaseh v'chava kilkala chayavet b'korban shelo itiru la elinaseh. If they told her she could get married, again, call to action. And Amar Ravina v'halot nan hachi. That's not what it says. It said, look at our Mishnah. Horu Beit Din la'avor, to transgress, to actually do, go against. Alachan mikol mitzvot amor b'torah, one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. V'tulo midi, and we have nothing more to say. Okay, there you have your mirror image of the sugya, and we're moving on. Halakhic asa shogeg al pihem. Now we get to these words, shogeg al pihem. This is interesting. Usually we darshan psukim in the Torah, like, oh, it says this word, it says that word. Here we have a drasha on words in the Mishnah. It's a little less common. It does happen. It actually often happens at the beginning of Masechtot, these Sfara'itic sugyot where we really darshan. But this actually isn't a Sfara'itic sugyot because it's Rava, but where we really start picking at words in the Mishnah. And that's what they're doing. V'nitne v'asal pihem shogeg lamali. The word shogeg is totally unnecessary. Why don't we just say, as I said when we read the Mishnah, the yachid did what they said. That's shkaga. It's unwitting, and it should be chayav. So why does it say both? So now we're going to again see the sugya in two versions. We're going to have Rava version 1, Rava version 2, and each one says the opposite. So in the first version of Rava, I'm a Rava. Shogeg la'atuye, what he's going to say is that extra word shogeg is coming to include an additional case. And there's shogeg and there's alpihem, two cases. What's the case that it's including? Okay, the obvious case is the one we said. They said the chaylev is permitted. The person ate the chaylev based on what the court said. And the Mishnah is teaching us no korban. Okay, they don't have to bring a korban, not the community, because there was no community, who was sinning, and not the individual because they relied on the court. What does the word shogeg include? What if it was unwitting? What does unwitting usually mean? Well, unwitting is, what if I thought it was shuman and it really was chaylev, right? I took a piece, I thought it was shuman, it turns out it was chaylev. That's shogeg. So what if horu Beit Din shechaylev mutar? So it starts off here, the court ruled the chaylev is permitted. Now, this person went to eat, but what did they go to eat? They went to eat shuman, not the piece that there's a piece of chaylev, permitted fat. There's a piece of shuman, permitted fat. There's a piece of chaylev, forbidden fat, that the court has ruled is permitted. So, and the person sees in front of them two pieces that, according to the person, both are permitted. But they meant to eat the shuman one, not the one that's really chaylev, that by mistake the court ruled it was shuman. So, nitchalef lo chaylev b'shuman va'achalo, patur. So now they, by accident, okay, here's the extra accident. They didn't mean to eat the chaylev that the court permitted. They meant to eat the shuman, but accidentally ate the chaylev. So now you're going to be patur or not. So if Rava says, shogeg comes to include that case, meaning you're going to be exempt, patur. That's shogeg. Al-piyam is al-piyam mamash. Right? Al-piyam is you went to eat the chaylev because the court said it was permitted. Okay, so you see there's an extra step in the first one. Because you didn't really even mean to eat the chaylev. You really meant to eat the shuman. By accident, that's the accident, by accident you ate the chaylev. And it turns out the chaylev was actually, the court had said it was permitted anyway, so maybe you would have eaten it had you known, but you weren't trying to eat the chaylev. Somehow you did. Somebody switched the plates. I don't know. But then both cases you're exempt. Ika da'amre, here comes the other version, which goes to say the opposite, which is in that case you're actually going to be obligated. It's not included. Amarava, shogeg al pihem hu de patur. It's one case. It's when your shkaga is based on what they said and not based on that you picked up the wrong plate and ate the wrong food. Okay, so here's the exact opposite. You'd actually be chayav in that case because your shogeg was not because of the court. Your shogeg had to do with something else. And that's if you read it as one case. Now, the next part of the sugya is also going to have two parts. So they're going to start like this. Now, this part of the sugya, by the way, is a total repeat of what we just did. Because they're going to say what was obvious to Rava. Now, we don't know what it was obvious. Yes or no. Obligated, exempt, we don't know. But the case was clearly obvious to Rava. We just don't know which version is right. But whichever version we have, there's an obvious answer to Rava. But Rami Bar Chama actually didn't know what the answer was. So he asked the question. Debai Rami Bar Chama, he asked exactly this question. So what's the law? Do you have to bring do you not have to bring in that weird case? So Amar Rava, now we're going to have the exact same two versions of Rava. In his answer to Rami Bar Chama, he says, I'll prove it from the words of the Mishnah. And then it just goes version 1 first, version 2 second, here's your answer. But each time Rami Bar Chama is going to say, what do you mean? You could read it the other way. And basically, that's why Rami Bar Chama is going to say, I don't have an answer. Okay, so Rava is going to be very confident in his answer. Rami Bar Chama is going to say, what do you mean? It could be read the other way. So this is all really just reviewing what we did, but in a different format. Rava Tashma, let's learn from here. The words of the Mishnah. Halakhic asa shogeg al pihem. Look at the words of the Mishnah. It says shogeg and it says al pihem. Two cases. Shogeg al pihem lamali. Why do you need them both? Lav la tui, is it not? Going back to version 1. Horu Beit Din shechel mutar v'tchelef v'chel b'shuma v'chel patur. Is it not to include case 2? To which Rami Bar Chama says no. Dilma shogeg al pihem u'de patur. Maybe it's one case. shogeg based on the court is exempt. But maybe you be chayav here, and that's why I don't have a clear answer. Ika de amre, some people do this in the exact reverse order. Amar Rava Tashma, Rava said, let's learn from the Mishna. Halakhic asa shogeg al pihem. Now, how does he read shogeg al pihem? As one case, like in version 2. My love shogeg al pihem hu de patur aval nitzchalef l'chel b'shuma v'chelo chayav. He says, right? It's because the shgaga was because of them. If the shgaga was that he picked up the wrong plate by accident, that's his fault. He has to bring a korban. Comes Rami Bar Chama and says, no, Doma o shogeg all PM. Maybe you could read it as two different cases. Maybe there's shogeg and there's all PM. And back to square one. So that's why Rami Bar Chama didn't have an answer. Even though Rava was confident in his answer, Rami Bar Chama wasn't. And we're not even confident what answer Rava gave because we have two versions. Biplugta. Now we're going to point out. Next sugya, we're kind of, this sugya connects with that one, but we're going to kind of move into another direction here, which is, we're going to say, not just that Rami Bar Chama wasn't sure what to do and Rava had an answer, and they talked about this in the fourth generation of Amoraim, but it was actually a machloket already in the first generation, between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Biplugta. Beit Din shechelek mutar. This isn't coming from the words of the Mishnah. This is just giving the case. Are you chayav or you're patur in this case? If you accidentally ate the chelev thinking it was shuman, and it turns out it was chelev, and it turns out right again, the court had ruled that the chelev was permitted. Okay, so in that case, Rav amar patur, Rabbi Yochanan amar chayav. So here's your machloket. Rav says you're exempt, right? Like one version of Rava, and Rabbi Yochanan says chayav, like the other version of Rava. Meitive. Now we're going to bring a difficulty on this. Now here we're going to read the pasuk about when a person brings a sin offering. Okay, okay, if one person sins from within the nation, okay, now we're going to darshan this me'am haaretz. Okay, let's just read now the drasha. Me'am haaretz ba'asota prat lemumal or mishumad. It depends what version you have. This comes to exclude, what does it mean, someone from within the community? Not someone who left the community, who converted out, so to speak, who decided not to keep religion. Okay, they're still considered Jewish, but they're not going to bring a korban. Why are they not going to bring a korban? Okay, so right now we're going to say they don't bring a korban because they're excluded from the pasuk at Rasha. Comes Rabbi Shimon ben Yossi, Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Whether we say these words or not, it really means that Eino tzarich. You don't need this drasha because it's obvious that someone who left the religion and doesn't believe in Judaism anymore, doesn't practice Judaism, is not going to bring a korban shkaga here. Why? For very obvious reasons. Harehu omer asher lo te'asena b'shkaga ve'ashem ohoda. Okay, to the next pasuk is if you actually, this is about the nasi. It's a different pasuk, but in the case where the nasi brings a korban, it says that you and something you didn't do, you did it bishkaga, and you're guilty, or you found out that you did it. Now, what does it mean you found out? This is someone who went to bring a korban. I said before, you don't bring it if you're intentional. Why? Well, you bring it when it's unintentional, and then when you realize your mistake and you regret, so you want to bring a korban to get atonement. You get atonement when there's regret. You don't get atonement when you don't regret it. So you need what's called hashav miyadiyato. You have to say, oh, I did this wrong. I need to fix it. Hashav miyadiyato maybe korban al shigato. Lo shav miyadiyato ino maybe korban al shigato. If you don't regret it, now if you left the religion, you obviously don't regret it. So you don't need a drasha for that. So now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, remember, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? If I eat the shuman, I think I'm eating the shuman. It turns out I ate the chelev. And the chelev was a mistake on the court's part. They said it was permitted anyway, right? But I'm obligated. Now, Rabbi Yochanan said I'm obligated. So comes the Gemara and says, Im ita halo shav miyadiyato. Now, what happens when I find out I ate the chelev instead of the shuman? I don't regret it because I think the chelev permitted because the court permitted it. So there is no shav miyadiyah, so I wouldn't bring a korban. Amar Papa, no. Kasavar Rabbi Yochanan, the kevan dechimit yada lehu lebeit Din hadr behu v'hu nami hadr behu shav miyadiyato karina be'v'chayav. You're right that at the immediate first stage I wouldn't be shav miyadiyato, but I would be at the second stage, meaning stage one is I find out, oh, I didn't eat the shuman, I thought I actually ate the chelev. But I say it's okay because the chelev, the rabbis permitted. But then the court realizes their mistake, that they permitted this thing that was really forbidden. When I hear that, I will regret. So there is regret here, and that's Rabbi Yochanan's response. One last part about this, and then we move on to the next part, which is Amar Rava modeh Rav she'eino mashlim l'rov tzibur. Now Rav said you're exempt. Okay, if I ate this wrong thing, I'm exempt. he says, he admits, though, she'eino mashlim lerov tzibur. Now, let's say the tzibur, let's say we have a case where they ruled the chelev was permitted, and most of the people ate the chelev, okay? They all ate the chelev thinking it was permitted. Now, I was different, though. What did I do? I thought I was eating the shuman, and I accidentally ate the chelev. So Rav admits that I wouldn't count. Now, what happens? In order to bring a parlin davar shel tzibur, we have to count. Do we have a majority of the community? Now, how do we count the majority? Do I count in the majority or not? I don't count in the majority. Why not? My time. In order to bring, this actually a pasuk in Bamidbar, but we'll get back to what's context in Bamidbar there, but it says there, in the context also of one of these sin offerings, because the whole nation sinned. We have to be in the same mistake. I made a different mistake, right? It's true, right, that it's going to count in the same category, and that's why the individual is going to be exempt. But because I relied on the court, but I didn't rely on the court in the same way everyone else did, because it's not like I said I want to go eat that because the court said it's permitted, so I can't count when we do the tally, do we have a majority to obligate a korban or not. Now we're going to go through those three cases, this very simple section. You did it with the court, the judges, you did it after they did it, or you did it by yourself. Now what's the bigger, unique case? Even if they didn't do it, I'm still exempt, the last case. So it goes from lighter to heavier, right? That even in the case where the court didn't do it themselves, they didn't eat it, but I did it on my own, I'm still exempt. So the Gemara says, why do you need all three? Well, the first one wants to do the build-up. It's called the structure of a mission. It's not only this, but also this, right? You'll be exempt if you do it with them, you'll be exempt if you did it after them, and you'll even be exempt when you did it on your own. But in the second case, when we say the judge is responsible no matter what, right? Whether they did it with the court, whether they did it after the court, whether they did it on their own, that's the opposite. If you want to go lo zo av zo, not only this, but also that from lighter, right, easier to bigger, unique halacha, like, wow, really, even then? So in the case of them, it should be the reverse. Not only are you chayav if you do it by yourself, you're even going to be obligated if you do it with them, right? That's a bigger chiddush. You would think maybe if the judges also did it and you were part of the judges, maybe you wouldn't be obligated. So it's the opposite order, to which the Gemara says, top of Amabet, zo ve'ein tzarich lomar zo katani. There's two different structures. One type of Mishnah could be organized in a lighter to stronger chiddush, right? Like most obvious case and then to less obvious. And sometimes it's less obvious case starts first and then it gets to the, right, it goes the other direction. Right? Zo, and you don't even need to say, like, this is obvious. Okay? So you can go in both directions, and the first three go in that direction, the other three go in the other direction. Now we're going to get to this judge and the student. And the first question of the Gemara is, right? It gives these two cases. A judge or a student who can issue halakhic rulings. Tarte lamali, why do you need both? Aren't they kind of one and the same? Right? To be a judge and to be a talmid, a ro'eh lahora'ah, are really kind of one and the same. I mean, obviously one got to the place of judge and one didn't, but they're kind of in a similar category. So I'm a Rava Eitzrich. You need them both. Why? You might have thought if you just had judge, what's the criteria of a judge? You need to be gamir, knowledgeable, and severe, know how to understand something from something else, right? A judge needs to see the people, know how to have a deeper level of analytical skills, you would say. Aval gamir velo severe lo. You might think, though, maybe this only applies to someone like that, and not someone who has a lot of knowledge, but isn't as advanced in their analytical skills. So that's why you need also the talmid haro'eh lahora'ah. Now Abai says to him, what are you talking about? Amalei Abai, lahora'ah gamir severe mashma. It sounded like Rava was saying, a judge has to be gamir v'savir, and a student who teaches, who issues a ruling, doesn't need the severe part. Abai says, of course you need a severe part to be someone who issues a halakhic ruling. Of course you need to have that level of understanding. To which Rava answers, a bit of an interesting answer, I would say. I'm not the most convincing answer. Ana hachi kamina. This is what I meant to say, Rava says. If you only have one, it's really the issue that there's something extra here. Okay? Yes, both are gamir v'savir, but if you only had the dayan, you would have said, hava amina. You would have said, hani mile gamir v'savir. Aval gamir v'lo savir lo. You might have thought only if you're knowledgeable and have analytical skills, but not if you're missing the analytical skills. Therefore, Tana ro'eh lahora'ah, they added another case to teach you mi Mishna yitera, from the fact that there's an extra case. Now, even though that the criteria of being ro'eh lahora'ah is actually you need both, but the fact that there's an extra case must be coming to include something else. Afilu gamir velo savir, savir velo gamir. Most people get rid of the second word, savir velo gamir. Nobody really thinks that if you don't have knowledge, but you're have good analytical skills, we're going to put you in this category. Because you have to have the basic knowledge. So some girsot just take out those words. So let's just stick with even gamir velo savir. The fact that there's an extra case there comes to teach you, even if you don't have those strong analytical skills. Now we want to know an example. What's ra'ui l'hora'ah? Kigon man, like who? Amarava kigon Shimon ben Azai v'Shimon ben Zoma. Now notice they don't have the name rabbi, but they were considered real gedolim. They were very knowledgeable for whatever reason. They didn't have smicha. Okay, they weren't judges, but they would be in the category. What we see here is we're talking high level. We're not talking high caliber people. We're not talking about, just any regular rabbi. Amalei Abaye. Rabbi says, if you're going to go with those extremes, the real top people, Kia Gavna Mezidu, that is intentional. How could you possibly say they're chayav a korban, right? That's what the Mishna said. They go on their own and say, they disagree with the court. Anyway, they go and do what the court said. When they know it's wrong, that's mezid. Forget about, you certainly can't say we relied on the court. But you also can't say it was unwitting, and that's why I'm bringing a korban. Korban's only for unwitting. This is intentional. To which Rava responds, Vilit amech, hainu ditanya. He says, well, according to you, how are you going to read this braita? Okay? Ditanya. And here he's going to prove two things. He's going to prove, number one, ra'oi l'hora'ah is like Ben Zoma, and, like Shimon ben Azai, and he's going to also explain what the shkaga is, which is very interesting. Ditanya, ba'asota achat. Okay, this is one of the words in the pasuk. If you do one of the mitzvot, yachid. What do they learn from asota achat? Yachid ha'osem mipi atzmo chayav. This is in the individual sinning. An individual who does on their own is chayav. Right? That's a classic. I decided to eat a piece of chaylev. My mistake. I didn't realize it was chaylev. That's my mistake. I bring a korban. Horayot Beit Din patur. This is just basic. This isn't yet anything yet. But if the court told me, then I'm exempt. That's our Mishnah. Ketzad, so the Braita continues. What would be a case? Horu Beit Din shechelev mutal, v'noda le'echa mehem v'ta'u. Now here they're going to say, we're not talking about an individual though. We're talking about an individual judge. So now, let's explain. If the court ruled the chelev was permitted, and one of the judges realized, sheta'u, that they made a mistake, talmid yoshev lifnehem v'ra'oi l'hora'ah, where there's a student who is sitting there, here's the ruling, but he's also can issue his own ruling. Kigon Shimon ben Azai, here you have it. Okay, there's Rafa proving he was right. Yachol Yehei Patur, you might think he'd be exempt, like the individual who's exempt. Talmud Lomar ba'asota achat. Who's asota achat? Yachid ha'osel piatzmo chayav b'hora'at Beit Din patur. From there we see the yachid who does on their own is chayav, and that's what this person is. Now, elahechi mishkachala, what would be the case exactly? Okay, they're now just explaining it better. Kigon diyada asur. So he knew it was forbidden. So what's his mistake? You ready for this one? This is big. Vikata'e b'mitzvah lishmoa divrei chachamim. His mistake was, so I'm sitting there in the court, I'm a judge, I see what they're ruling, I disagree, I know for a fact they made a mistake. Now, I might mistakenly think, what's my mistake? I think that even though I disagree, my obligation is to listen to what the rabbis say and go with their mistake. Right? So he says that must be what it's talking about there, and therefore the didinami dita'u b'tzvah l'shmoa divrei chachamim. That's the mistake that they're bringing the korban for. We thought originally, when we read the Mishnah, they made a mistake because they did this action that was forbidden. They thought it was permitted, but they didn't think it was permitted. They knew it was wrong. So that's not the mistake. The mistake is they thought that when they disagree and they know the court is ruling wrong, they thought that they still have to follow the court. And they were wrong because they don't. And that's what they're bringing the korban for. That's a big, fascinating topic because it goes back to the whole thing of Zakei Mamre, and you are really chayav l'shmoa divrei chachamim. This is a bit different. This is saying, well, actually not. When you know they're wrong, don't do it yourself, right? Don't go and eat that chaylev when you know that it's wrong. Now, we're going to go to these last words in the Mishnah. Zaklal, hatoleh b'atzmo chayav, and hatoleh b'beit din patur. And now we get back to the big thing about, I see, Miriam, you're talking about the Yerushalmi and Rashi about lo tasul. By the way, you can listen in Ayala's introduction. She relates to that. Okay, I don't have time today. But zaklal, hatoleh b'atzmo chayav, hatoleh b'beit din patur. That was a total repeat. Why are we repeating it? So, la'atuyemai, what's this coming to include? Okay, so the first one, hatoleh ba'atzmo, if you rely on yourself, you're chayav. What cases must be including some unique case? What is it? Let's say we have a person who never listens to the court. Everything the court says, they do the opposite. And then the court rules that this chaylev is permitted. And they go and they eat it. Okay. They are not toleh b'dat of the court. They can't say, I'm exempt because the court said so. What do you mean? You never listen to the court. All of a sudden now when the court said something's permitted, which is really forbidden, now you're going to claim I'm holding by the court? No. You're chayav. You have to bring your own korban. Toleh Beit Din la tuye. So why does it say toleh Beit Din patur? What's that coming to include? Another case where there'll be an exemption. What's that? La tuye Beit Din. This is a very fascinating one. Horu Beit Din. Okay, the court ruled it's not chaylev, it's permitted. V'yad'u sheta'u. Then they realized they made a mistake. V'chazru behen. And they changed their ruling. So now what happens? But the word doesn't always get out. This happens, right, with mistaken, put something in the paper and then they write a little mistake on page 10, there was a mistake in the paper, sorry, that was wrong. This happens a lot. So nobody sees the correction. So this person didn't see the corrected mistake, just heard that it was permitted, and then the person went and did it anyway. Well, they're still going to be exempt. Why? Because they were relying on the court. Maybe the court already figured out their mistake, but this person didn't, so they're exempt. To which the Gemara says, how could you say that our Mishnah is coming to exclude that case when that's said explicitly in the next Mishnah? So you don't need this case to say it now when it's explicitly in the next Mishnah, to which the Gemara says, no, Tane v'hadar mefarish. It's said here, and then they explicitly, it's implied from here, and then they, just so you make sure you get it, they explicitly say it in the next Mishnah. Okay, now we start, even though we're at the end of our daf, we're starting the complicated part of today's daf. Okay, there's one element here that's a little bit complicated. I'm going to try to simplify it as best as possible. It's also the end of the daf, so it's going to be a little hard, but we're going to do our best. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Now, I mentioned this in the beginning of class because I said as soon as you learn the Mishnah, I want you to know that the Mishnah is not according to all the opinions. And now we're going to get to the rabbi's position. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel about our Mishnah, Zo divrei Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda. Aval chachamim omri, yachid sh'asa b'horayot Beit Din chayav. But the rabbis hold a different position. If an individual follows the court, let's put it this way, okay? Since there's no par halem davar shel tzibur, you have to bring a korban, okay? Someone needs atonement. There has to be atonement some way. You're not going to do the par because that's a big communal offering. When the community does it, an individual does it, you're going to be chayav. Okay, we're going to get now to, there's three categories. Individual, mi'ut, minority of the people, and rabim, majority of the people. Okay? The mi'ut is going to be like the yachid, but they're going to bring it as its own category in 2 minutes. So first they're going to say, my Rabbi Yehuda. How do we know where Rabbi Yehuda's position is, and how do we know the rabbis? And we're going to basically show there's two brighter. One holds like Rabbi Yehuda, one holds like the rabbis. At the end of today's daf, which we're not going to start today, the Gemara is going to ask, but I'll just tell you, they're going to say, notice that each brighter doesn't have a name to it. So they're going to say, how do you know that one's Rabbi Yehuda and that one's the rabbis and not the reverse? But that we're going to deal with later. So my Rabbi Yehuda, where's the Breita? This is very simple. Titanya im nefesh echad tafta b'shgaga ba'asota. So there's three words there that are open for drasha. Nefesh, a soul. Echat, one. When nefesh is already one. And then be'asota, when that person does. So they're going to darshan those three things. Elul shloshah miyutim. They come to narrow down. What do we learn from this? Ha'usemi piatzmo chayav b'horayot Beit Din patur. You're only going to be chayav if you do it on your own. One of these words is used for that. It doesn't really matter which one right now, but one is used for that to teach you. If you do it on your own, you're chayav. If you do it b'horayot Beit Din patur, and that's our Mishnah, right? I'm only chayav a sin offering if this is what I told you we're going to call now, shigigat ma'aseh. I made a mistake in my action. If I did it because of the court, that's a whole different category, and there I'm exempt. I don't bring a sin offering. That's Rabbi Yehuda. My Rabbanan. Now we're going to read a Breita that's completely incomprehensible. Okay? So don't worry that you don't understand it, because it's very hard to understand. The Gemara is going to suggest one possibility, suggest a different possibility, and then come up with an explanation, which in and of itself is not so simple. So that's our complicated part. So my Rabbanan, Ditanya. Adayin ani omer. And now I might have thought that mi'ut kahal shechadu chayavim. Let's say the minority of the people follow the court. I would have thought, or we don't even know actually, mi'ut of the kahal sin. We don't know how they sin. It could be following the court. It could be based on their own actions. We don't know right now. You might have thought you would think they'd be obligated to bring a sin offering. She'ein Beit Din miv'im al yidehem par. Because the court doesn't bring a bull offering if a minority of the people sin. So therefore, you might have thought they have to bring their own. Rov kahal shechatu yu pturim. But the majority might be exempt. Why? Because let's compare. The minority doesn't have a parhalim davar shel tzibur. The majority has the parhalim davar shel tzibur. So if you've got some other thing, maybe you'd be exempt. So if the majority, now we don't know what the majority did here. That's what is all left open here. You might have thought rov akal shechatu, they'd be exempt because the Beit Din brings a par in the case for the majority of the community. Talmud lomar, therefore it says in the pasuk. Now what pasuk is this? The pasuk by an individual who sins and brings a sin offering. Me'am ha'aretz, from within the community, which before we darshan to say not someone who left the community, but now we're going to read it differently. Afilu ruba afilu kula. Even if they all sin, even if most of them sin, they still have to bring an offering. Okay, very unclear. Don't worry that you didn't understand this at all. B'mai. What are we talking about? Are they obligated? Ilema b'shigigat maaseh. Are we talking about if the majority of the people decided on their own, the chaylev was, right, that would be the obvious, because they're not chayav if there's a parhalim davar shel tzibur, right? Must be, they all decided this was not chaylev and they all ate it. So they all have to bring their own individual sin offerings even though they're the majority. That's what maybe the conclusion of this bright is. But if that's the case, I'm sorry, I read the first one wrong. B'mai. Ilema b'shigat maaseh Beit Din. Right. If it's shigat maaseh Beit Din, sorry. First option is maybe it's that the court ruled. Okay? Then, shelo b'hora'ah Beit Din. No, there's a problem with the Girsa. 1 second. Ilema b'shigat maaseh Beit Din. Sorry, I was right in saying it's if it's shigat maaseh. I just read this wrong. I put the comma in the wrong place. If it's that they all just thought chaylev was permitted and they ate it, okay? Not because of the court. So, Beit Din shelo b'hora'ah, right? And then they did it not because of a hora'ah of the court. Beit Din ma'avi detayu. Why does it start mentioning the parhalim davar shel tzibur? It's irrelevant then, right? What does that have to do with anything? And if it's shelo b'hora'ah Beit Din, mimaiti shelo b'hora'ah, right? If it wasn't because the court ruled, then they wouldn't have to bring shelo b'hora'ah. In other words, it says, the sentence in the Braita that said, Rova Kahal would be exempt because the Beit Din brings a par. So it seems to be relating to a sin of the courts. You can't say it's not talking about that. And if you're going to say Ela B'hora'ah, it's talking about a Beit Din, a ruling of the court, that also makes no sense. Because then in the end it's concluding, if the majority did it because the court ruled that way, they all each have to bring an individual sin offering. And it's learned from the words Me'am ha'aretz, which is talking about an individual sin offering, right? Which isn't talking about the court making a mistake. The words Me'am ha'aretz is a totally different context. It's not talking about a mistake of the court. So basically, we tried like the homogeneous approach, which is either it's all talking about there's no hora'ah of the court, which can't be because the Braita relates to it, or it's all talking about the hora'ah of the court, which can't possibly be because that can't be what the conclusion of this Braita is, that the majority would have to bring their own individual sin offerings. And la lav hachi kamar must be saying the following. Mi'ut kahal shechatub. Okay, before I get here, I just have to explain one thing, and then maybe we'll get to the second part of this tomorrow. But what they want to say here is like this. There must be a chumrah about the minority over the majority, okay? If you're saying someone has to bring a korban, who would it be more likely, the majority or the minority? Probably the majority, because when the majority sins, it's much worse. So we need more reason for a korban. This is going to say the opposite. What's it going to say? It's going to say that the minority of the people sinning has a stringency that's not by the majority. And what is that? That when the community follows the court, okay, this is going to be the key thing, the majority of people are exempt because there's the parhalim davar shel tzibur. But the minority is actually obligated, and that's going to prove our point. The minority and individuals have to bring their own sin offering when they sin based on an erroneous ruling of the court, and that's the rabbi's position. So we're going to say that this Braita is going to go like this. I'm going to read it right now inside, and then we'll end here. Mi'ut kahal shechatu b'shigigat maaseh chayavim. If the minority of the people sin on their own, they thought chaylev was permitted and they ate it, they're obligated. Why? She'ein Beit Din miviim al yedayim par b'hora'ah. Well, they're in a more stringent place because in the case where the court rules erroneously, they have to bring their own sin offering. Because they have to bring their own sin offering, that puts them in a more strict place than the majority, who wouldn't have to. They'd be exempt because they're covered by the parhalim davar shel tzibur. Now, what do you see here? This is all based on saying their law is more strict. Why? Because they have to bring a chiyuv chatat when they follow the court as individuals, right? Minority individuals. So now here comes the key words that they're going to add into the Braita. Ha-hen chayavim. What do you see here? This is the rabbi's position, that individuals and minority of the people have to bring a sin offering, even though they followed the court, against what the Mishnah said. Now, the Braita continues and says, that's already our point, but the Braita is going a different place, which is, so you might have thought, Rov tzibur shasu b'shigam aseyu p'turim. What if the minority of the people think the majority of the people think the chaylev is permitted, and they all go eat it? The whole community starts eating chaylev, thinking it's permitted, on their own. You might think they'd be exempt. Why? Well, because in the parallel case, because again, their law is more lenient than the parlin davar shel tzibur, than the minority. Beit Din mivi'im aleim par b'hora, because in the parallel case, if the court had ruled, they'd be exempt. So maybe they're exempt here. That's what the drasha comes to tell you. No, they're not exempt. Talmud lomar me'ama aretz, when it talks about the individual who made their own mistake, it actually includes the tzibur who made their own mistake. And even the majority, or afilu rubo, afilu kulo, are going to have to bring a korban. That's the drasha. Okay? Rav Papa is going to say, Bimai doma lohem velo Beit Din. Maybe when it says the Beit Din, if that little line in the middle, it said the Beit Din doesn't bring, but maybe the people also don't bring. In other words, why do you assume they're ha-hen chayavin? And then the Gemara is going to explain, which we'll start with tomorrow, and that'll be a good review of this. They're going to explain basically exactly what I said before. Minority has a stricter rule, and the whole thing is premised on, the only way to read this Braita, the way they explained it, is that it's all premised on that the minority has a stricter rule. And what's that? Because they have to bring the korban. So the only way to read it is say chayavim, otherwise this Braita makes absolutely no sense. It's already hard to understand as it is, but okay, we'll get back there tomorrow and we'll review it. So we started with this two cases, an individual and a judge, and it's the opposite, right? If they go with the court, the individual is exempt, the majority, the dayan, special person, is not exempt. And again, we said they have to bring a korban because mitzvah l'shmo l'divrei chachamim, that was their mistake. We also saw that the rabbis disagree with the position of the individual is exempt. That's how we ended. And they actually say the individual has to bring, and all the minority of the individuals have to bring. Right? If it's the minority, they all have to bring their own sin offering for doing it. The only time you're exempt is once we get over that majority. Okay, but Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think that. They think they're always exempt. And then we went through a whole bunch of different things. Number one, what language has to be used for it to be a parlin davar shel tzibur? What's this shogeg al pihem? Are there two cases? Are there one case? We went to the why the order of how the people did it or didn't do it, right? Lo zo af zo ein sarich lomar zo. Then we have why you need both the judge and the student. We had who is ra'oi lahora'ah. We gave an example and what was wrong with it. And then we ended with this machloket Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, and we showed a Braita that chose Yehuda's position and a Braita that chose the rabbi's position. And we'll come back to that tomorrow. A long daf, a lot to say, but our intro into Masechet Horayot, like I said, in general, the dapim are going to be kind of long. And wishing everyone a good day, and Shnishma B'Salot Tovot.